Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Spirit of Liberty broadcast. Appreciate you joining me. Let me know if there's any audio issues or anything. And so, because we are live today and hitting on a very carnal subject, so I'm sure you all will probably enjoy that. We're going to talk politics today, and there's a reason I want to talk about politics. I do think this is something that men typically like to talk about more than ladies do. And it's something, though, that while I don't think it's wrong to talk about, I don't think it's wrong to be interested in politics. I think that we probably should have some interest in politics. It is something that can be very dangerous, and it can be something that we can get too obsessed with, and it can really cause some problems. So there's really a lot of pros and cons to paying attention to politics. Talking about politics, and we're going to talk about some of those things today because I like to talk politics. I'm interested in it. I don't pay a whole lot of attention these days, and sometimes I feel like I don't pay enough attention. I probably should know what's going on in the world. Other times I'm like, I'm paying too much attention. This stuff's really bothering me. But I will say, since Rush Limbaugh has died, I don't really see the point in listening to talk radio anymore, but I used to listen to him. And I will say this too, I used to listen to him way too much, and especially during election years. And some of the stuff would just start messing with my head. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what I want to do to kind of start off, I want to talk a little more spiritual, and I want to show something in the Bible, because there's something too that frustrates me a lot when I look at what's going on in the world politically, and especially in America. I am astounded by the ignorance of the American people when it comes to government, law, and how things are supposed to be. And because people are so dangerously ignorant about how things work in government, it's enabled them to get away with a lot of junk and to deceive people in a lot of ways that they shouldn't be deceived. But I'm telling you, I believe we are ignorant when it comes to politics as a country by design. I believe the public school system wants to keep you in the dark about what it's really like and how our laws are really supposed to work. I think the news media, they are more of a distraction than they are information when it comes to all things political. And as a result of that, we are letting them get away with murder. And I think the more people are informed about things, the better. And one thing that we saw in 2020, when things really got out of hand in this country, is it gave a lot of people a chance to see how certain things work. And one thing that kind of amazed me is, you look at some of these, our presidents, governors, our governor in particular, and, you see these people, and it's like, these are just wannabe dictator tyrants. And you know what? They are. But even these wannabe dictator tyrants, it's always interesting to see what seem like small things stop them dead in their tracks, because we do have some protections in our laws. And thankfully, the people that set up our form of government that we have today were from a long time ago. They are a lot smarter than the people that we have running our country today, and your average citizen, and we are still reaping the benefits of what they set up a long time ago. But through ignorance, and stupidity and lies being promoted, they are successfully chipping away at what was originally given to us, and so that's why we're seeing things get worse and worse. And I do believe if people were more informed when it comes to these things, first off, I think a lot less people would get deceived by it. But I also think it would be harder for them to implement this stuff too, because we do have some things that are still in place that are very powerful and that are very strong. And so something that I find interesting in the Bible, I want to do just kind of a little bit of a Bible study here to kind of kick this off, because whenever we think back to the olden days, we often think of them as being a lot more primitive. But the truth is, there were some pretty, impressive forms of government in many ways that they had way back, before the time of Christ. Now, the problem with these governments and these kingdoms is the people were very wicked. They didn't have Christ, but at the same time, their ability to set up a system, to have laws, and to even submit to those things is better than, in many ways, in our country today, where it's just this attitude of democracy decides everything, which is not what our Constitution set up. We do not have a true democracy in this country, but people think we do. And so as a result, everybody thinks we're just supposed to do things according to mob rule, what the public thinks, what most of America thinks. And that's kind of how things are becoming. And they're just disregarding laws, disregarding the Constitution. Even these governments back then that were very wicked people, they were afraid to do that kind of thing. And what we almost have being promoted in our country today is just more like anarchy in a lot of ways. And it's very frustrating, but I want us to go to the book of Ezra, and I want to point out some things that we see through the book of Ezra that's really important. A lot of this stuff gets glossed over when you're reading it. It doesn't get preached about a whole lot, but I find it very interesting because, again, I'm interested in political things to a certain extent. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but I'm interested. I occasionally watch programs, read things about it. And I did a lot more in 2020 when I was just trying to understand how they were even able to get away with some of the things they were getting away with, and then when I would see them stopped, I was always interested in what stopped them too. And so I find stuff like this in the Bible very interesting, but this is in the book of Ezra. This is after the children of Israel have been captive in Babylon for 70 years. We see in the Bible that after Babylon had them in captivity 7 years, the Medes and Persians came and wiped them out. And now the Medes and Persians are in control. And God was using that because he's about to end the captivity of Israel. They've been punished enough. They're about to be restored to their land. And so in Ezra 1, verse 1, this would be right after Daniel, when he did there was the handwriting on the wall where he told Babylon, you've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. That night, Medes and Persians came through, wiped them out. So this is shortly after this in Ezra. And it says, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So while God let the Babylonians destroy it, God, in the first year, after the 70 years were up, he put it in Cyrus's heart to send Israel back and to allow them to rebuild the temple. And so Cyrus, he made a decree. He made a law. He was able to do this as king. He had legal authority to do this. And at this time, they have legal jurisdiction over Israel because they've conquered the land. They're the world leaders at this time. And so now we're in chapter 3, and we're about 2 years later here in chapter 3, because once he made this decree, you got to understand, while we read these chapters all together, you can sit down and read through the book of Ezra in one sitting, many years passed during this time. And in chapter 3, we're a couple years later, and it says, now in the second year of their coming unto the house of God at Jerusalem, because they weren't just going to get there in one day or 1 week. It took time for them to come back. All these things, it was moving slow. Things are moving, but it's moving slow. And it's important we understand that because they have time to forget some stuff. But the law is the law, and they're in the process of fulfilling these things. They come into the house of God at Jerusalem. In the second month began Zerubbabel and Shealtiel and Jeshua the son of Jozadak and the remnant of their brethren, the priests and the Levites, and they were come out of the captivity unto Jerusalem and appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to set forward the work of the house of the Lord. So they're getting everything together. They're taking advantage of this decree that Cyrus has made, and they're putting it into practice. So chapter 4, we see that they have enemies that are there in Israel. The people that had been placed in the land when the Babylonians had come in, they didn't like Israel coming back, but it's their land. And so it says they hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, until the reign of King Darius. So it kind of gives a summary of what happened. While they're doing this work that they legally are able to do, they have people working against them, trying to undermine them, that do not want this to take place, even though legally they're allowed to do this. And, and understand, God's what gave them the authority to do this. But legally and earthly speaking, God had moved Cyrus to give them permission too, because God wants this being done. But it's not going to be easy. And so I don't know for sure how many years have gone on, but it said this went on until the reign of Darius. And so when the new leadership came, after several years, they tried to, the enemies tried to claim that the Jews didn't have any legal authorization to rebuild the temple. And so it says in Ezra 4:23, now when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum and Shimshai the scribe and their companions, they went in haste to Jerusalem unto the Jews and made them to cease by force and power. Then ceased the work of the house of God which was at Jerusalem, so it ceased unto the second year of the reign of Darius king of Persia. Now this is relevant to us because we have these people come along and by force and power illegally stop them from doing the work of the Lord. And so now a process has got to play out. We've got to find out what the law is. These things are going to be disputed, and often things are disputed in court. And we saw this in 2020. By force and power, many governments came in and they stopped churches from having in-person services. And, you had people saying, the Constitution, but the people in power are saying, nope, we're allowed to do this. But you know what? In pretty much all the cases that I know of, after things went through the process, and it's pathetic how long it took after it went to the courts, guess what? Every time, just like what we're going to see here in the Bible, the Constitution prevailed. Yeah, they are able to have services. And from what I understand, I know Pastor Shiflett, they got nailed, but they threw out everything against him. He didn't have to pay any fines. I believe North Valley, from what I've been told, Pastor Treber's church, I believe they won in the court cases too. I don't think they racked up thousands and thousands of dollars of fines, and I don't think they had to pay any of those things. From the stories I know about in America, the churches won all the battles. Now, it was wicked and it was of the devil that those authorities came and even messed with those churches in the first place, and they make me sick and I'm disgusted with them. But you know what? I'm thankful that God, I believe, put it in the heart of the founding fathers to put protections in place, and that ultimately, prevailed in these situations despite enemies. But there's a similar thing going on here. People who had some power are illegally stopping the work of the Lord. And so, if you read the book of Ezra, several years pass where the work just ceases. It says in 4:24, then ceased the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem. So it ceased unto the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Now, chapter 5 shows us that says, then the prophets Haggai and Zechariah. I'm not going to read all this. I'm just going to try to tell you because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. But Haggai and Zechariah, the prophets, God told them, tell these people to get back to work. Who cares what the powers that be are saying? It's their job to get back to work. Tell them to get back to work. And that's what the book of Haggai and Zechariah are. If you want to know where they are in the timeline of the Bible, they're right there in Ezra chapter 5. So they tell the people, you know what? Who cares what these people say? Get back to work. They did. They got back to work. The powers that be threw a big hissy fit. They challenged them. And so they created a legal challenge. But you know what? People of Israel didn't care. They knew they were in the right. Just like these churches that stayed open. They knew they were in the right. But the question is justice going to prevail in this situation? You don't always know that. Sometimes courts make bad decisions. But in Ezra 5:17, it says, now therefore, if it seem good to the king, let there be search made in the king's treasure house, which is there at Babylon, whether it be so, that a decree was made of Cyrus the king to build this house of God at Jerusalem, and let the king send his pleasure to us concerning this matter. So they're like, let's check the records. Even back then, they had records, they had documents, and even though they were a godless people, they had enough decency to know that we should follow laws. And that if these laws were put in place, decent people aren't going to take us serious if we're just ignoring these things. Even this was not like this just dictatorship where whatever they say goes. That's not how they were supposed to do things. That's not how it should be in nations. It shouldn't be that way anywhere. Even in a church, I don't think it should just be whatever the pastor says goes. No, you know what? You ought to be able to have a statement of faith. And I don't think a pastor should just be able to just change on doctrine like that and just throw out whatever doctrine. I think there ought to be a process for it. Sometimes you need to change things. Sometimes you need to fix things. But it shouldn't just be whatever I say at the moment goes. That's ridiculous, and it's irresponsible, and it's lazy. And we've changed things in our church, but we have a process for that. And I'm not going to go into all that. We have a way our church is governed, and it's not just people are supposed to just blindly follow whatever comes out of my mouth on any given day. That's lazy. A church ought to be responsible enough and capable of putting out a doctrinal statement, and saying this is what we believe. And you know what? And if somebody joins a church, when the church believed in a King James Bible, the pastor should just be able to get up and be like, yeah, I changed my mind on that. And you know what? You're out of the will of God if you leave the church, quit giving your tithe, all that kind of stuff. That's ridiculous. It shouldn't be that way. And so anyway, in chapter 6 of Ezra, not going to read it, but Darius ends up finding the records, and sure enough, just like they said, you know what? Cyrus did give him authorization to do this. And so not only did Darius, almost like he was trying to cover for the fact that they had kind of messed up and allowed some things to be hindered, he not only authorized them to do it, but he's like, anybody that messes with them is in trouble. And we're not only that, we're going to help them out. We're going to do all this stuff. And so they did. They went and they successfully were allowed to go and to rebuild that temple. But go read through the book of Ezra sometime and just pay special attention to the legal process that they had. And it obviously wasn't perfect. I'm not saying let's go to a Medes and Persians type of government. I'm just saying they had a form of government. They had a system in place. And even these powerful, powerful kings submitted to those things. And I think that's impressive. And that's the way it should be done in our country. A president is not a king. And a president, he's supposed to swear to uphold the Constitution. And it's not just whatever he says goes. And, I think the stuff they're doing with the executive orders and things are terrible. I think it's not the way things were intended. Yes, legally they're able to do executive orders. And, because our Constitution is not perfect, they didn't always do what needed to be done. They probably should been some things there to kind of limit what they're able to do. It's crazy some of the stuff that they're getting away with. But either way, I think our founding fathers did about as good as, flawed men can do. And we've benefited greatly. But I am always impressed when I watch people follow the process. And I am not impressed when they have to be forced. J.B. Pritzker, our governor, he had to be forced. He completely overstepped his bounds. It was very clear in our state constitution, and we had laws in place on how to, what powers a governor has during a pandemic. And J.B. Pritzker completely ignored it. And you know what? He had to be challenged, and he was, thankfully, by guys like Darren Bailey, who's running for governor, who I fully intend to vote for. But they fought it, and it went to court. And the governor, he reluctantly, but he did, submitted to the court. You know why? Because he understood my powers are limited. And that's how it should be. And so I find how all that stuff works very interesting. I think those are good things to talk about. I think it's important that we understand those things. That, when I was a kid, I still remember having this conversation with my dad. My dad, he really liked President Ronald Reagan, and he was really sad when he left office. And I remember sitting there watching live Reagan's farewell address. And I remember just telling my dad, it's like, Dad, why doesn't he just stay president? And my dad's like, well, they're only allowed to have 2 terms. And I'm like, but he's the president. So can he just tell everyone he's not leaving? And, my dad had to explain to me how, he's not a king. There's a difference between a king and a president. And, and obviously, as I was only 8 years old at the time, a lot of the stuff went over my head. But, I learned that day that a president can't just do whatever he wants. I didn't understand how it all worked, but I knew a president can't do whatever they want. And, and as time went on, I learned more how the government works. But I think there's a lot of good in understanding these things. There's a lot of, and so I want to briefly, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this today. I might spend more in the future. And if you have any questions on this, feel free to leave them in the live chat. But I want to talk about kind of some of the pros and cons of following politics. Because while there's a lot of good reasons to do it, there's a lot of bad reasons to do it. While there's a lot of benefits to being educated in this area, there are some dangers too that I think can really harm us as individuals. And I said, it's typically, it seems like it's mostly men that struggle with this, but I'm sure ladies do too that get involved in it. But first off, because I think it's very important we pay attention to what's going on in our country and especially in our local communities. I think more so in our local communities. 2020 also taught me that, that it's your local leaders that affect your life more than the national leaders in many cases. I really feel like the national leaders, while obviously they do have certain power and, what they're doing is real. I feel like they're just kind of the figureheads that the news media puts out there to keep us distracted from the things that are really affecting us. And those are things that are more local, more on a state level, on a local level. We're all distracted by that. We all know who the president is. We all know who certain senators are. We all know who Nancy Pelosi is, but at the same time, it's our local leaders that affect us probably more than they do. And we don't even know who they are. It's our state leaders that affect us more than they do. And we don't even know who they are. And so in the meantime, the news media is keeping us all distracted with the national leaders because that gets good ratings because everybody's interested in that. While our local leaders are just killing us and doing awful things. And we got to watch out for that. And, speaking of Nancy Pelosi, I heard if she goes to Taiwan, the Chinese might shoot down her plane. And all I have to say to that is, please don't stop it, China. Remember Willy Wonka when he was trying to stop the kid from doing one of the things they did? I forgot. But it's just like, please don't. Anything but that. Please don't go after Pelosi. I despise that woman. I really do. But anyway, the pros and cons of following politics. So first off, the more eyes that are on our leaders, the more accountability they have. And again, when I say that though, I think we ought to know what our president's doing. I wish more people would pay attention to what he's doing because I'm pretty sure if they actually did pay attention, they would never vote for the guy again. But even more so locally. And one of the things that, when everything went down in 2020, I was calling all of our local leaders. I mean, I did. I made a lot of phone calls during that time. And, one of the things I found out is that, that kind of stuff gets their attention. It really does. I mean, these people were getting hammered during that time. And normally they don't get any phone calls. One of them I talked to was talking about how, typically, they were lucky to get one phone call, one message a week, or it was just rare. People actually contacted them. And then, she was saying, I came in this morning, I had 18 voicemails, from people like you. And they were actually returning, the local leaders, they actually, many of them returned my call, returned my emails, allowed me to express my concerns. And politicians, they probably tell you what you want to hear a lot of times. But I will say, I was watching, and our Congresswoman, Tony McCombie, I told her, I'm watching. I'm going to watch what you do. And I remember Darren Bailey got kicked out of the state house because he wasn't wearing a face diaper. And I remember when he got kicked out, they weren't able to just do it. They had to have a vote. And so they did. The whole house voted about whether or not to kick him out. And even a bunch of Republicans voted to kick him out. That disgusted me greatly. And I literally I looked to see what our Congresswoman did. And sure enough, she did not. She voted against throwing him out. She voted in favor of him. And I sent her an email and just, I let her know, hey, I'm glad you did the right thing here. That was ridiculous. And I was disgusted. And if anyone representing our area would involve that, I would have done what I could to give him an earful. And so I think it got their attention, and we didn't have problems in this area. We didn't have anybody trying to shut down our church. And I think a lot of it too is because, these people, they want to get reelected. And it was important to me that voices like mine were the ones that were heard. And so we made noise. And I think we need to hold our leaders accountable. And I know it's hard on the national level. We don't have a lot of power and a lot of influence. Somebody like me, I mean, boy, I can't even imagine what I'd have to do to even get the attention of the president. There's probably nothing I could do legally to get his attention. And so, but at the same time, that's not the case when it comes to local things. And I think we need to keep our eyes on these people. Let them know that we're watching them. And so the more eyes on what's going on, the less likely they're going to be to slip in things that harm us. When you look at some of the just stupid things that get passed, they're always slipping things in, but nobody understands how the process works. Like, for example, too, the whole Roe versus Wade thing. I find, obviously I'm thrilled what happened there, and it's fascinating to me too, because it's like, man, we've been, our country has been allowing women to butcher their babies for like over 50 years, and now it's gone. But it's like, how did that happen in the first place? And it was really interesting seeing, as I started reading a lot of articles about how this was going to affect other states. And it just showed how, that a lot of, there was always talk every election year, we can't let those Republicans get in. Roe versus Wade is going to get overturned. And I was like, that's never going to get overturned. They're never going to go back on that. But people who understand the process understood that if they ever have a conservative majority, if they don't have a completely activist, bench, then these things are going to get challenged. And it was a bad decision. It was a horrible decision. It never should have happened, but they had an activist court during that time that just pushed it through, and it was won, but it was done at the highest level. And that's why it took so long. But people understood, because of how our legal system works, and I'm not going to go into all that because some of you probably get bored with a lot of the details of it. But when you actually study how that got passed and everything, you realize just how weak of a law that was. It was very weak. And they've always known that. And that's why as soon as they got that conservative majority, it was easily challenged and it's the same thing too with queer marriage. Same thing. That was something that got forced through with an activist court. And it is very weak. And that's why right now, they are in the process in Congress trying to do things to strengthen that law, because it's a very weak, flimsy law that should be able to go away, but nobody knows how that's done. Nobody is paying attention to that stuff, and it's through a lot of these different things they vote on where they slip a lot of this junk in. There's some controversy right now over this one bill that they're trying to pass. I forgot what it's called, where they're trying to fund, taking care of these military people, veterans who've been exposed to harmful things, and it's caused physical problems for them. Well, if our government and if we had these people in our military and they expose them to these things, of course they should take care of that. I mean, I do think that, these wounded veterans and things, they ought to be taken care of. I think everyone believes in that. However, the bill that they're trying to pass that a lot of people are against, it's because they've added in billions of dollars in spending on completely unrelated things. And that's what they do all the time. They'll have a bill, they'll call it Love the Children bill. But, you go look at that bill and it's probably, and I made that one up, but usually what they call it is opposite of what it's actually for. Love the Children bill is let's, expand abortion rights or something like that. It's something completely, or they'll have one good thing in it and they'll name the bill for that one good thing, Veterans Protection Act. But then there's all kinds of funding for transgender studies and funding transgender this and that in schools. And then Republicans vote against it. And they're like, can you believe they voted against the Take Care of the Veterans bill? They hate veterans. No, they don't want to fund a bill that has funding for, tranny awareness out there. That's why they're fighting these things. And you know what? They shouldn't even be allowed to add all that junk in there. But they're doing it and people have no clue. And you've got morons watching the news and they're hearing this stuff and they're just falling for it. And it's like, no, there's a lot more to it than that. They're slipping these things in all the time. It's the same thing too when they passed Obamacare. Nancy Pelosi's famous line, we've got to pass it to find out what's in it. Because nobody can read through these bills that are thousands of pages. Well, why are they thousands of pages? Why can't we simplify some of these things? And it's because they're trying to get all these things added in. And in what they do, this is what's happening. So you have these congressmen who have a vote. So now they have some power. Well, it's like, so what they do is they buy their vote by saying, all right, well, if you pass this, support the trannies bill, what we'll do, we'll give you funding for this thing that will help your state out, in your district. And so then, so they'll vote for it, even if they're maybe against it. Because, man, now I'm going to get all this funding that's going to, help our state and my jurisdiction or the area that I represent do something good. And I can go tell everybody I did that. And then the local community is fine. Oh, man, we got all this federal money to, build this new park or whatever, build this facility. And it's, all because of our congressman. But what they don't tell you is because he voted for the Support the Trannies bill. And that's exactly how all this stuff works. And people are clueless about it. And so what they do, they just kind of pick a side. And, whatever the Democrats are saying, I support it. They don't look into what actually, what the whole argument is actually about. And Republicans are the same way. Everybody just ends up picking a party. And so, where you have to be careful, the con of following this stuff is it's super easy to get sucked into things that a lot of times you can't do anything about. And again, there are some things we can do to affect things. There's some things we can't do anything about. Yeah, and I agree, Randall. Say no to pork spending in bills. That's what they call it, pork spending. And so, a lot of people can get a lot of anxiety. They can get depressed. They can get overly worried because, yes, it can be very depressing. You start watching the news, you start watching a bunch of Fox News, CNN, whatever. It's horrible. It's horrible what's going on. And and so the thing is, I'm not going to get up and tell people, just don't follow politics. It's detrimental to your mental health. Well, here's the thing about that too, though. There's a lot of people out there that are capable of, limiting themselves, not watching too much, watching, maybe some people watch it for entertainment purposes, I mean, some of the stuff's entertaining, it's fun watching a good argument. It's fun watching the debates. Some of it's entertainment, especially when Trump was in office. Okay. Listen, say what you want about Trump, but he was entertaining. There's no doubt about that. So some people might enjoy it. They might find it relaxing, but either way, I do think it's important that if you find yourself getting too sucked into things where it's consuming a lot of your time and affecting you mentally, I think you need to pull away from it. And I've been there before, especially during election years in the past. where I get too caught up in it. And sometimes I will go weeks and months and I will have no idea what's going on. But then something happens I'm interested in and I get sucked in. And, and if you're somebody who is very likely to just get sucked into that stuff, and if you choose to just say, I'm just going to ignore it, I have to, you know what? I think that's a wise decision. But don't go condemning everyone who pays attention and who likes to talk about it. Again, there's good reasons and there's bad reasons. And you've got to make sure that you are just careful with yourself, that you don't get too sucked in. And you'll do it. And it can get you depressed. And, sometimes I'll go on InfoWars and I'll start watching some of their stuff. And some of it's entertaining. Some of it's informative. But some of it just freaks me out. And some of it gets me depressed. And, I'm glad there's people out there trying to put the truth out, trying to get the word out. But you know what? I do need to be responsible for myself, and I got to make sure I don't get too caught up in it. I don't want, especially as a pastor too, I don't want my preaching to just turn political all the time too. And if I'm watching politics all the time, that's probably going to happen, and you could probably, I try to be disciplined in my preaching and to keep it on point and with the subject and the scripture and everything. And I purposefully preach messages about stuff that's going on politically sometimes. But, if I'm preaching a message, I'm preaching on Acts chapter 10 tomorrow about the conversion of Cornelius. Now, if I'm preaching that sermon and all of a sudden, there's several monologues about political things going on right now, and it turns into a current event sermon, I'm probably paying too much attention to politics. And I don't know if you've ever seen that before. I know I'm guilty of it. I think every pastor is guilty of it, where they're supposed to be preaching on a certain subject, maybe a certain topic, an expository message through a chapter in the Bible, and then it just turns into a current event rant. That's not good. All right. If you want to do a current event rant, and I've just decided that before too, I'm just going to be honest that that's what it is. And I'm going to preach a message with a title about whatever it is. I don't want my messages to just turn to whatever's going on in that day. Say, I'm talking about Acts chapter 10 tomorrow. I don't really know why Joe Biden's name should come up in that sermon. And if it does, I've probably been watching too much news. I've been probably talking too much politics. And so that's just kind of you can tell where a pastor's mind has been through his preaching. It can be very obvious. And so these things, so again, the negative side, it can start to mess with your head. It can start affecting your moods negatively. And I think we need to be responsible in that area, and we shouldn't allow that to happen. And so if you're somebody, you're just getting obsessed with it, you know what? The country will survive without you being informed of what's going on. It really will. Right now your family needs you, your church needs you more than America right now. So just understand that the world will survive, and at the end of the day, we really don't have, especially on the things that we're usually getting obsessed with, we usually don't have any power when it comes to the national stuff. So, so again, and then the pro, if you know what's going on, you might be able to make a difference. You might be able to influence people the right way. You might be somebody who's capable of kind of helping inform people. We need more voices of reason out there. Everything today when it comes to politics, it's all emotion. It really is. It's all emotion. And we've all just kind of picked sides. And our guy can do no wrong. And their guy can do no right. That's the way it is politically. And so, it's probably very rare that we change minds, especially, and I think probably where you are most likely to change minds, it's going to be with those that you are surrounded by, personal friends, family, neighbors. Social media, no. I can almost guarantee you that foaming at the mouth Democrat on Facebook or on that YouTube comment you are not going to change their mind. I don't care what you show them about Joe Biden. You are not going to change their mind. And it's the same thing too with Republicans. Man, they're in the tank for Trump. And remember what Trump said? I could go out and shoot somebody, and they'd still vote for me. And that's how it is. That's the world of politics. And that's where you can get really frustrated, because it's like, you just want to get to the truth. And look, we're putting all this truth out there and people just aren't listening. And you know what? You know why? Because when it comes to politics, it's all about emotion. It's never about it's not about the facts. It really is. I've been thinking about preaching a message for a while. But I haven't, the Holy Spirit hasn't given me the green light on it yet, because it just seems a little carnal. And but at the same time, I think it's important for people to understand. And if I do preach on it, I probably won't use this title, but I wanted to preach a message about Kool-Aid drinkers. And, because I find the Kool-Aid drinking types fascinating. Jim Jones and that cult that he had. It's amazing to me that guy was able to get that many people to poison themselves. I know they forced a lot of them, but it was so obvious that guy was a freak. It was so obvious. And, but yet he got people to drink the Kool-Aid, right? And actually it was Flavor Aid, apparently, but you know how it goes. And, so what one thing that I've just found fascinating is, people, when they get into that Kool-Aid drinking mindset, nothing will change their mind. Nothing. You can't fix those people. When they get behind a figure, when they get behind a leader, that guy can literally do anything and they're going to follow him. He could literally tell them to drink poison Kool-Aid and they will drink the poison Kool-Aid and they will kill themselves. I mean, folks, there's a lot of cults in this world for a reason. There's a type of people that are out there that they attract, and a lot of them are in politics. They're the ones that are out protesting all the time. I mean, some of these protesters are just absolute, just absolute scumbags, and they're like professional protesters. It's what they do everywhere. They go to all these different things, and you're not going to change these people's minds. And that's where a lot of people get frustrated, and what starts to affect them mentally is just like, how can I change these people's minds? You can't. You really can't with most of these people. And often they're the ones getting us all worked up. I think, you see these people too, they go and they make these videos arguing with protesters. And, people look at that and they say, what does that accomplish? I will tell you what it accomplishes. It gets you clicks on YouTube and on social media. That's it. And these people know that. They're doing it for views. They're doing it to, expand their audience. And that's fine. If they're YouTubers, that's what they do. But you know what? They're not even dumb enough to think, I'm going to change these people's minds by arguing with them. And you got to understand, these are the main people that we're seeing out there, that are being put out there in politics. The protesters, the people that you see at the rallies, the people that you see at every event. Okay, they're the Kool-Aid drinkers. Okay, I'm actually planning on going to a Trump event this weekend, and you say, why are you going? I'm going for fun. I'm going to observe. I'm going to watch the the crazies, and I plan on being entertained. And you know what? There will be a bunch of Kool-Aid drinkers at that. There's no doubt about it. There'll be a bunch of them. And but I think when it comes to people, that if I vote for them, if I support them, I'm going to hold them accountable. I'm not going to just, agree with everything they do and back them no matter what. There's no way. It's, I don't think I have to do that. And it's amazing how many people are incapable of doing that, where, a Republican can get up and just say something stupid, do something stupid, and all the Republicans circle the wagons for him every time. It's like, can you people at least pretend to be objective? Can you at least pretend to be honest, for crying out loud? This is ridiculous. But that's the way it is in the political world. And you know what? It's the same thing too. In churches, there's politics in churches, and I think a lot of that too is because, a lot of Baptist preachers, they're watching news all the time. And we've allowed this Republican Democrat culture where undying loyalty to the Republicans, undying loyalty to the Democrats, it's kind of shaped how we are. And we get the same way even in the religious world. You have your different groups, even amongst the IFB, you have your different groups in the IFB. Everybody's always picking sides, and their guy is incapable of doing anything wrong. I mean, they can do the most extreme, bizarre things, and people will support them, until God exposes them. Jack Scopp, he was able to get up and polish his shaft at a youth conference and got away with it for a while. He really did. It's amazing some of the things that people have gotten away with, for a while, and just watching people, and you just see their supporters, and it's like, what is wrong with you? I mean, some of the dumb things people get up and preach, no big deal, it's fine, justify it. I mean, they can be vulgar behind the pulpit, they can, lie, slander, whatever. Hey, it's my guy. It's all good. Let me tell you something. Those people, you will never change their mind. They are the Kool-Aid drinkers, and there's people out there today. Jack Scopp's out of prison now, okay? He is out of prison. And if he decides to go back in the pulpit, in the ministry, he will have a lot of followers. I'm telling you right now, I think there will be a lot of IFB preachers that will support him, that will probably have him come preach, that would go to his meetings. I think if Jack Scopp went and started a church tomorrow, I think he'd have a bigger church than I would, just like that. You know why? Because there's a lot of Kool-Aid drinkers out there. And you know what? At some point, you just have to just kind of write people off and not even think about them, not let them affect you. And again, when you get caught up in something politically, that's where you can get yourself in trouble. You're trying to change people that can't be changed. And that's who is being put forth out there. We have the normal people in the world that we can affect and that we should try to affect. But understand, the ones being put in front of you are the ones that can't be changed. The people, the panelists of guests on CNN, nothing will change their minds. The people that are in elected office, okay, nothing's going to change their mind on things. You're not going to fix them. You're not going to show them anything that's actually going to change their mind. Those protesters that are out there, whoever side they're on, they will always be on that person's side, no matter how much truth you show them, no matter how obvious it is. They will always be militant when it comes to these things because they're the Kool-Aid drinking type. But thankfully, the Kool-Aid drinkers are never the majority. They're never, they do not represent the mainstream. They are just the one that gets attention because in the news media, it's all about the ratings. Okay? It's all about the ratings, and normal people, balanced people, they don't get ratings. It's the crazies. It's the extreme characters. It's the drama queens like AOC. They're the ones that get the attention. Okay? The ones that we should probably be paying attention to are the ones that we don't know. If you want to know what senators we should probably actually pay attention to, go look up a list of the senators and the names that you recognize, cross them out. Don't even pay attention to them and pay attention to the rest of them. Because they're probably actually the more moderate ones, the more normal ones. The ones they want to shove in our face are the worst of the worst. The ones that are going to do the bidding, no matter what, of the people that put them in power. And so those are the ones that we're seeing. And that usually is where people's focus goes. And so you see that, the protesters, you see the politicians, and it's like, I've got to change their mind. No, don't even try. They've drank the proverbial Kool-Aid. They can't be helped. It's the people that are around us. It's the people that are in our day-to-day lives. They're the ones that we were meant to affect. They're the ones that we actually can affect and make a difference with. And, because understand too, they can always, our country's big enough. There's enough nut jobs. They can replace those ones. There's just going to be more that pop up. You can't control all that stuff. And so you just, it's pointless to even try. And so but we do want to make a difference where it counts. And I do believe we have the power to do that. But I do think we need to be informed to a certain extent, but remain balanced. Don't let these things affect you too much where it does it ruins your spirit. It changes your attitude. Don't be afraid to just walk away from things and to say, you know what? I'm not fit to fight in this particular battle. You're not wrong for doing that. I don't believe God has called me into politics, and so I'm not going to kill myself doing that. My calling is ultimately pastoring a church. I do other things sometimes because I have other interests and other hobbies, and people sometimes will have been critical to me because I've gone to political events. Somebody will probably get mad at me for going to a Trump event. I don't care. I'd go to a Biden event if he was there too, just to observe. I'll probably get inspiration for a lot of good sermon material. In reality, if I did that, but at the end of the day, I'm not drinking any of these people's Kool-Aid. I'm not doing that, and I know my limits with these things and when to walk away. And you need to be the same thing with all things political. It's important to understand what's really going on, but understand when you can make a difference and when you can't. Learn when to walk away, and when to get involved. And even politics in the religious world, it's no different. We're made out of the same flesh that those disgusting protester types are made out of. And a lot of that culture has rubbed off on us. It really has. And we gotta make sure we protect ourselves from it. And so, that's the thing too. Even with me, there's some people out there in the political world, they've been lied about so much that it discredits the truth. I've heard CNN and Democrats lie so much about Trump. When they say, if they threw another accusation out tonight, I'm probably not going to pay a whole lot of attention to it. Same thing too with some preachers. They've been lied about so much. I don't even really think about it when I hear stuff, because it's probably just another lie. And that's why you don't want to lie to people about people, even if they're bad. It just discredits the truth when you do that. And but I've learned too, at the end of the day, because folks, not trying to talk about myself, but there's a lot of lies out there about me. And I just found out recently I wasn't saved by an online railer, which was pretty funny. But at the end of the day, the people lying about me, when preachers lie about me, it's usually to rile up their base. And the Kool-Aid drinkers are going to listen to everything they say. And I could take a bunch of time to respond to all these things, give proof. It won't change a thing for the Kool-Aid drinkers. It won't. And those who are honest, those who are objective, they usually can see right through that stuff, because people see what they want to see. Somebody wants me to go to hell, they will find a way to declare me unsaved and see me as unsaved. But, thankfully, the opinion of a railer does not affect reality. I'm going to heaven whether they like it or not. And it's the same thing too. A preacher lying, does not, all of a sudden make me guilty of a sin. But at the same time too, should I waste my time, when the only people that bought it are the Kool-Aid drinking types? Should I? No. There's no point in doing that. And let them keep drinking their Kool-Aid And you know what? I mean, these aren't the kind of people you want around you anyway. I mean, do I really want to go try winning the protesters at the Democrat rally or at the pro-abortion thing, trying to get those people in my church? No. I don't even want them anywhere near me. And so but there's a lot of normal people out there that are the fence, those that can be influenced, those that can be helped. Those are the ones that we're going after. And so, when these things turn political and everything we see in the news, everything we see in Washington, D.C., it's all political. You can't trust most of it. And these people aren't objective. And so be careful getting too caught up in it. It can be a black hole that'll suck you in and it'll make you miserable. And you know what? I've got better things to do than to get all caught up in that stuff and worry about that stuff. Sometimes I just kick back and I'll just get entertained by it. Sometimes I'll see the stuff too where people are lying about me, and it helps me. I like to look at who the commenters are and all that, so I kind of know who to mark in my mind, and who to, because I look bad all the time because of people associate me with weirdos because of my Facebook friends. I don't even know who a lot of them are, but I always appreciate seeing those posts, because then I kind of know who to unfriend, because I don't know who everyone is. And I'll admit some of it's entertaining, but if I concern myself with changing minds of people like that, I'd be a miserable person. I really would. And so don't you do that too when it comes to all things political. Our country right now there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of anger, and it's by design. The news media is trying to cause that. They're trying to get people riled up. They're trying to rile up the right wingers, so we'll go do something really horrible so they can take away the Second Amendment, so they can take away, the First Amendment. That they're trying to rile us up is what they're doing, because they need us to do something bad. Don't give in. All right? Don't fall for it. You're not going to change their mind. And so understanding, when it comes to politics, understanding where you have power and understanding where you don't have any power is very important. And so I'm not telling you to completely unplug, even though you might need to, because there are areas where you can make a difference if you're informed and if you speak up about these things. But there are areas where there's nothing you can do. You know what? I could devote my life to proving Trump really won. And you know what I'm capable of getting. I am not capable of getting him back in office. And I'm not even going to try. I'm not. That is not my calling. I would not. And even if I succeeded, I don't even know how much it would improve my life or this country. I really don't. And so I'm not going to waste my time with that. That is not my calling. But even pastors get really caught up in that stuff to where it affects them negatively. So I do. I want to be informed. I find a lot of stuff when it comes to political interesting, entertaining, but it is a dangerous thing to mess with. That just like there's good, there's a lot of bad that can happen. And I think we all need to be very careful with it. And, don't be that guy that just declares everyone sinful who pays any attention to politics and watches the news at all. That guy's an idiot. Don't be that guy. But don't be that person too that's going around demanding you have no important. If you don't go out there and vote for Trump, this is going to happen. Don't be that guy either. Okay. Some people, they've disconnected from politics because it's best for them to not be connected. And you know what? I can't argue with people that want to do that. And I'm not going to go force them to listen to me, do a rant about, all the pork in some bill that they're trying to pass. They don't want to hear that. They don't care. Go find your buddy that's interested in that and talk to him about it, and you guys go straighten out the world's problems together and over a cup of coffee. And if it makes you feel good, great. But if not, don't beat yourself up. Just go make a real difference. Talk to people about Jesus. You'll accomplish a lot more with that than you will talking about Trump. I'm not telling you can't talk about Trump, but I hope I always talk a lot more about Jesus and the Bible than I do politics. And we're all capable of crossing that line. So I hope this was a help and a blessing to everyone. I appreciate you joining me and watching. Sorry I didn't get to acknowledge everybody on the live chat. You know how I get sidetracked, but I do appreciate everyone joining me live. And we will hope to see you next Tuesday. So we'll talk to you all later.